Sometimes the most dangerous storms are the ones that brew silently behind a calm and smiling face. Explore the hidden tensions and the explosive conclusions of life's most difficult and intense internal battles. Subscribe now and stay tuned for the lightning strike in our next video. The phone rang at 2014 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had been staring at the ceiling for hours, listening to the rain hit the window above our bed, thinking about the name we had finally agreed on that evening. Maeve. We had settled on Maeve. My husband answered. I watched his face change in the dark, the way it went from half asleep to something I had never seen before. He sat up. He said, "Where?" And then he said, "How bad?" And then he didn't say anything at all for a long time. When he hung up, he turned to me and said his father had collapsed. Massive stroke. They needed us at the hospital in Dayton immediately. I was 31 weeks pregnant. We drove 2 hours in the rain. My husband Daniel held my hand the entire way and didn't speak, and I didn't either, because there was nothing to say. His father, a man who had taught Daniel to fish and fix engines and never once raised his voice in anger, was lying in an ICU somewhere, and we were driving toward him through the dark. We made it. His father survived. It took 3 days in that waiting room before we knew he would be okay. And on the second night, I started having contractions. The nurses told me it was stress. They gave me water and made me lie down and said the baby was fine. Everything was fine, I needed to rest. I tried. I really tried. On the morning of the third day, my water broke in the hospital cafeteria. Maeve was born 9 weeks early in a hospital 2 hours from our home, in a city where we knew no one except Daniel's father, who was 3 floors above us, still recovering from a stroke. She weighed 3 pounds and 2 ounces. They took her directly to the NICU, and I didn't get to hold her. I watched them carry her away in a plastic isocolette, and I remember thinking she was so small she didn't look real. She looked like something made of paper. Daniel stayed with me until I was stable, and then he went upstairs to his father, and I lay in that room alone and listened to the machines and tried to understand what my life had just become. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. I told her everything. The stroke, the drive, the contractions, Maeve. I told her Maeve was in the NICU, and the doctors weren't sure yet how her lungs were developing, and that I was alone in a hospital room in Dayton, and I needed her. I needed my mother. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Oh, sweetheart, that's a lot." I waited. She said, "The thing is, your father and I leave for Portugal on Saturday." I thought I had misheard her. I asked her to say it again. Portugal. They had booked a 3-week trip through southern Europe. My mother had been planning it for 18 months. Non-refundable flights, prepaid tours, a river cruise along the Douro. She started listing the things they would lose if they canceled. She mentioned a number, somewhere around $9,000 in deposits and bookings that couldn't be recovered. I said, "Mom, my baby is in the NICU." She said, "I know, honey. But the doctors are there. She's being taken care of." I said, "I'm alone." She said, "Daniel is there." I said, "Daniel is with his father, who just had a stroke." There was a pause. Then she said she would talk to my father and call me back. She called back 40 minutes later. My father had decided that canceling wasn't realistic given the financial loss involved, but they would cut the trip short if things got worse. They would check in daily. My mother said she had already looked up the NICU at the hospital and it had good reviews. Good reviews. My 3-pound daughter was in an incubator fighting to breathe, and my mother had checked the reviews. I didn't say anything after that. I thanked her and hung up, and I stared at the ceiling of that hospital room for a long time. My sister called the next morning. She is 4 years older than me, married, lives 20 minutes from my parents. I had always been closer to her than to anyone else in my family. When I was 16 and going through something I couldn't talk to my parents about, it was my sister I called. When Daniel proposed, she was the first person I told. I was her maid of honor. She was supposed to be mine. She called, and I told her what was happening, and she said, "I heard. Mom told me." I asked if she was coming. She said, "I can't right now. Marcus has his regional competition this weekend." Marcus is her son, my nephew, who was 11 at the time and played travel soccer. I said, "I understand that, but this is serious. Maeve might." I stopped. I couldn't finish the sentence. I tried again. "The doctor said the next 2 weeks are critical." My sister said, "I know. And I'm so sorry. But Marcus has been training for this for 6 months and I can't pull him out now. You understand?" I did not understand. But I said okay. I said okay. Because what else do you say? Daniel's mother drove up from Cincinnati the next day. She had just had knee surgery 6 weeks earlier, and she drove 2 hours on a healing knee, walked into that NICU with her cane, looked at Maeve through the glass, and cried. She held my hand. She brought food I didn't ask for, and sat with me while Daniel dealt with the insurance paperwork and the calls to his father's doctors. She slept in the chair next to my hospital bed 2 nights in a row. My parents landed in Lisbon on Saturday. I know because my mother sent me a photo of their hotel room. The weeks that followed were the longest of my life. Maeve had a pulmonary issue in her second week. Her oxygen levels dropped, and they had to adjust her treatment. And there were 18 hours where I sat in that NICU unable to do anything except watch the numbers on her monitor. Daniel was there. His mother was there when she could be. A few friends from home drove up on weekends. My family sent texts. My mother sent daily updates asking how things were going. She sent photos of the river cruise. She asked me once if I thought the NICU would let us do a video call so she could see Maeve, because the time difference made it hard to call. I put my phone face down on the table after that and didn't pick it up for a long time. My sister called once a week, always in the evenings, always for about 10 minutes. She asked questions and expressed concern and said things like, "You're so strong," and "She's a fighter." And I noticed she never once offered to come. Not once. Not an offer she had to take back. Not a, "I wish I could." Nothing. Just the weekly 10-minute call and then silence. Maeve came home after 41 days in the NICU. She was small and she had follow-up appointments every 2 weeks, and she needed a special formula and a monitor that tracked her breathing at night. The monitor alarmed twice in the first week, and both times I grabbed her out of the bassinet with my heart slamming against my ribs before the alarm resolved itself. I was running on 3 hours of sleep a night. Daniel had gone back to work because we needed the income. His mother came when she could. I did the rest alone. My parents came to see Maeve exactly once in her first 3 months. They drove up on a Sunday, stayed 4 hours, held her for a total of maybe 40 minutes, and then drove home because my father had a golf commitment the next morning. My mother said Maeve was beautiful. She said we were so lucky she had pulled through. Lucky. I smiled and said yes, and after they left I sat in the kitchen and cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry in weeks, because I had held it together for so long, and something about seeing them standing in my living room, healthy and tanned from Portugal, holding my daughter for 40 minutes like it was a courtesy visit, it broke something open in me. I made a decision that night. I didn't announce it. I didn't send a message or write a letter. I just stopped. I stopped calling. I stopped responding to texts the same day. I moved them to the bottom of everything, the bottom of my attention, the bottom of my energy, the bottom of my life. I had nothing left to give people who had given me nothing when I needed everything. My sister noticed first. She called 3 weeks later and said, "Are you okay? You've been quiet." I said, "I'm fine. I'm just focused on Maeve." She said, "You seem distant." I said, "I've been thinking about the last few months a lot." She asked what I meant, and I told her, calmly, that I had noticed she never offered to come to Dayton. Not once. I told her that I understood life is complicated, and Marcus had his competition, but that her nephew had a soccer tournament and my daughter was fighting for her life, and I thought that gap was worth acknowledging. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I didn't think you needed me there. You had Daniel. I said, I needed my sister. She said she was sorry. She said it in the way people say sorry when they want the conversation to end. I said I accepted it, and we hung up, and I sat with the feeling of that for a long time. I didn't cut her off that day. I pulled back. I let the distance grow naturally. Some bridges don't collapse. They just slowly become too unsafe to cross. 2 years passed. Maeve grew. She had her follow-up appointments, and she hit her milestones, and she started walking at 14 months, and talking in full sentences by 2.5. She had Daniel's brown eyes, and my mother's laugh, which was a strange and bittersweet thing to notice. She was funny and stubborn, and every single morning she woke up like the world was a gift. She was opening for the first time. Daniel's father recovered fully. He and Daniel's mother drove up for Maeve's first birthday and her second, and I loved them in a way that sometimes made me ache. Because that is what family is supposed to feel like. And I had grown up thinking I had it, and it turned out I had been wrong. My parents reached out occasionally, birthday cards, Christmas calls. My mother sent Maeve a stuffed rabbit that Maeve loved, and I hated myself a little for being grateful for it. My father sent a check on Maeve's first birthday, $100, and I stared at it for a while before depositing it. I didn't know what else to do with it. My sister and I talked a few times a year, holidays mostly. The conversations were polite and careful, and neither of us said anything real. I think she knew something had permanently shifted and was waiting for me to be the one to name it. I didn't. Some things don't need to be named to be true. Then, about 8 months ago, my sister called on a Tuesday afternoon and her voice was different. Flattened. The way a voice gets when it is carrying something heavy. She said, I need to tell you something about Mom and Dad's finances. I sat down. My parents had more money than I knew. My sister had known for years. She and her husband had been looped in because they lived close and helped with some of the accounts. There was a financial planner. There were investments. The total number, when my sister finally said it, made me set my phone down on the table and stare at it for a moment before picking it back up. More than enough. More than enough to have helped me without even noticing it was gone. More than enough to have bought a last-minute flight to Dayton, and still gone to Portugal, and still had everything they needed, and more. They had chosen not to because they had not wanted to. I said, How long have you known this? My sister said, A while. I said, Did you know when Maeve was in the NICU? A pause. Yes. I asked her why she was telling me now. She said our parents had updated their estate documents and her name was the primary beneficiary for the majority of it. She said she felt I should know. She said she thought it was unfair. I asked if she had said that to them. She said, It's complicated. I said, Is it? She said, They're still our parents. I said, I know who they are. We stayed on the phone for another few minutes, but neither of us had anything more to say. When we hung up, I went to check on Maeve, who was napping, and I stood in the doorway of her room and watched her breathe for a long time. I thought about the 41 days in that NICU. I thought about the monitor going off at 3 in the morning, and the special formula and the follow-up appointments, and Daniel working and me doing most of it alone. I thought about my mother's text from the river cruise and my father's 4 hours on a Sunday and the $100 check. I thought about what it means to have enough and choose to give nothing. I called a lawyer the following week. Not to be vindictive. Not because I wanted to burn anything down. I called because I wanted to understand what my options were, and because I had spent 2 years making myself smaller around people who had demonstrated, clearly and repeatedly, that my smallness was convenient for them. I was done being convenient. The lawyer was a woman about 15 years older than me. She had a direct way of speaking that I appreciated. She laid out what the law says about estate planning, about what can and cannot be challenged, about intent and documentation. She said the most important thing was that I had time, and that I should think carefully about what outcome I actually wanted. I thought about it for weeks. Here is what I kept coming back to: I don't need the money. Daniel and I are not wealthy, but we are stable, and Maeve is healthy and our life is good. I am not fighting for the money. I am fighting because someone should say out loud, with documentation and legal weight, that what happened was not acceptable. That a family with substantial resources watched a premature infant in a NICU and calculated the cost of helping and decided it wasn't worth it. That the daughter who needed help got nothing, and the daughter who stayed quiet gets everything. I am fighting because I want there to be a record. My sister called again 2 weeks ago. She said our parents had heard from their lawyer that I might contest the estate. She said our mother was upset. She said, "Is this really what you want to do? Make this a whole thing?" I said, "It already is a whole thing." It became a whole thing the night I called Mom from a hospital room in Dayton. She said, "That was years ago." I said, "Maeve still has her NICU discharge photos on the wall in my hallway. I see them every single morning." My sister was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm sorry I didn't come." It was the first time she said it like she meant it. Not to end the conversation, to actually say it. I heard the difference, and I held it for a moment. I said, "I know." I said, "But I need you to understand that sorry doesn't change what I'm doing. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because I need to." She said she understood. I don't know if she does. But she said it. The case is ongoing. I won't pretend to know how it ends. I won't pretend it's easy. There are days when I question whether any of this is worth the energy. Whether I should just let it go and focus on the life I have built, which is good, which is full, which has Maeve in it. And then Maeve does something, laughs at something on TV, asks me a question I don't know how to answer, reaches for my hand while we're walking. And I think about those 41 days, and I think about everything that had to go right for her to be standing next to me, and I think about the people who had every resource to show up and made a different choice, and I know I'm not done yet. I want Maeve to grow up knowing that when someone you love is in crisis, you show up. You cancel the trip. You drive on a healing knee. You sit in the chair. You do the thing. Not because it's easy or convenient, or because the money works out, but because that is what love actually looks like when it has to prove itself. I want her to know that her mother knows the difference, and that her mother chose to say so.